Robert Behr was born in Berlin, Germany on March 1, 1922. He was the only child of Alfred and Lily Behr. Bob's father served in the German army during World War I. The family took special pride in being patriotic German citizens. After Bob's parents divorced, Bob lived with his mother, who remarried years later. Life changed dramatically for Bob and for all Jews living in Germany when the Nazis took power in 1933. German Jews were targeted by laws that pushed them to the margins of society. A sophisticated propaganda campaign reinforced anti-Jewish sentiment and created a climate of indifference to the treatment of Jews in Germany. During Kristallnacht in November 1938, Bob's father was arrested and sent to Buchenwald concentration camp. Shortly afterwards, Bob and his parents were evicted from their apartment. They were able to find rooms in an elderly Jewish woman's apartment, where they lived until 1942. That year, the family was arrested and sent to Theresienstadt. During his incarceration, Bob transported bodies for burial and later worked at a satellite camp of Theresienstadt, building the SS headquarters there. Bob and his parents were liberated by Soviet troops in May 1945. Bob immigrated to the United States in 1947 and enlisted in the U.S. Army. He returned to Berlin in this capacity and served as an interrogator of former Nazi personnel. Bob left the Army in 1952 and later joined the U.S. Air Force Civil Service as an intelligence officer. He retired in 1988 after 39 years of government service. Bob Behr has been a volunteer at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum since 2001.
Let me first of all say hi to everybody, and I'm very, very pleased that you took the time to listen to my story. And we're going to jump right in. I'm now 90 years old, and I got to really go fast return to remember what happened 80 years or so ago. Let me tell you something a little bit about my family. It's so difficult to describe this because what we were was first Germans, second Germans, third Germans, and only at the last item we were Jewish. Jewish was spelled with a very small j. It was not the important thing. Germany was the important thing. We loved Germany. We prided ourselves to be part and parcel of a country which we loved, which we liked, which we were happy to be in, whose traditions and customs we honored. And the tragedy comes, of course, that the very people to whom we wish to belong said, we don't want you. We don't care about you. And so we grew up in that atmosphere of contradictions. On the one hand, the desire to be part and parcel of the German people. On the other hand, the constant animosity, anti-Semitism, which was thrown at us day in and day out, and followed by a void. We didn't know where we belonged. If I may, I want to give you a little example in the 1920s. As you know, in the 1920s, the mass media was radio. There was no television. There were newspapers and newsreels, and you probably don't even know what newsreels are anymore. But one of my first impressions in the 1920s was my dear father, who had the radio on all the time. He was a doctor, and in his free time, he listened to the radio. And I grew up, I become 6, 7, 8 years old in the 1920s. And what did I hear out of the loudspeaker? You guys interested in propaganda? That's what I heard. Nazi propaganda mixed with hatred and anti-Semitism. I remember going to my mother and saying, Mom, what is this man talking about Jewish conspiracy? Jews haven't caused the loss of World War I. Jews haven't caused the inflation, which was hidden for Germany. And my mother, me being a kid, said, don't worry about it. If your father is dumb enough, he wants to listen to this politician, just let him. You don't have a thing to worry about. We live in a free country, and the 1920s, under the Weimar Republic, it was a democracy, and I was much too young and too small to understand all the complexity of it, but I know that my mother said, you are in a free country and you don't have to worry about anything. So that was the growing up. My mother's happiness, don't worry about anything, came to a screeching halt in 1933 on the 30th of January. The monumental event was that Hitler became the Chancellor of Germany. Now the man whose voice had come out of the radio about Jewish conspiracy and Jews being guilty of everything that was bad, that man now had the power to implement what he was threatening. Let me share a couple of events. On the 30th of January 1933, when Hitler was appointed at 11 o'clock in the morning to be the Chancellor of Germany, that evening, the Nazi Party, who had now the majority in the parliament, the majority everywhere, staged a huge torch march all the way through Berlin. And they were singing, they had torches, they marched towards the Wilhelmstrasse, where there was the building where Hitler lived and where he greeted his people. There was a little balcony, and he stood there and greeted his people. Let me share with you what happened in our home. We lived in an apartment, and my parents invited a group of their friends the evening after Hitler took power. And being an only kid, I was always included with the grown-ups. I was allowed to stay and listen. Didn't always understand everything, but I was able to listen. And I noticed in thinking back about it that the group of my parents' friends split right down the middle. One half and another half. The one half said, we got to get out of here. That is terrible. That man is going to hurt us. We got to leave Germany as fast as we can. The majority of my parents' friends, and I don't remember the exact number of people who were there, they were like my mother, the eternal optimist. Quote, that won't last long. The German people are much too clever and much too intelligent to allow a person like Hitler, a rebel-rouser, uneducated, formerly sergeant in the German army, to run the country for long. Give me 6 months and he will be gone. Famous last words. He lasted 12 years. And so that was the first impact. There were other things. I'll give you an example from my own class. We had a new teacher, very good-looking young man with a very nice suit and a big swastika on his lapel, made everybody stand up and greet with Heil Hitler. So, what's the problem? The problem was there were 4 Jewish kids in that class. I was one of them. We were not allowed to use the Hitler greeting. So what do? You are 12 years old, you sit down and ignore the greeting, or you stand up and greet anyway and hope nobody will notice that you're Jewish. Didn't work. We sat down, the 4 kids, and of course it wasn't very long, we were kicked out of school anyway. Ladies and gentlemen, I never went back to school to learn something. I got my education when I came to the United States. But the rest of it was self-taught. My mother taught me, my father taught me, what they call homeschooling today. Since you're interested primarily about propaganda, let me share with you what the city of Berlin looked like. First of all, the Nazis are masters of propaganda. All this rained down on the city of Berlin. I remember at home, we lived on the 3rd floor, and you open the window, every once in a while you hear the people marching with their flags, and always music, and the type of music which makes you tap your feet, and it was like the city had a great big awakening, a unification of ideas. Nazism is the end of all bad things. We are now looking towards a new future, and it was remarkable. And then you look at it yourself, and you were not included. Remember the picture of my father in uniform? Remember he risked his life for the country? Now we were sitting while the marching was going on, while the people were jubilant of having now what they perceived to be a wonderful government. We sat there and we weren't part of it. Whatever happened to the idea we were first Germans, second Germans, third Germans? Nothing's changed. We still felt that way. But it began to wonder, because the people we want to be with told us over and over again that they didn't want to be it. The city of Berlin, you talk about propaganda. The city of Berlin changed so dramatically that it is almost difficult for me to convey this to you. Imagine your hometown. Imagine that you like a sport, say baseball or something, and every sport you want to play, you can't play because there's a big sign outside and saying, Jews not allowed to play here. My favorite sport in those days was swimming. Well, there are two things you need to swim. One is obvious, water, and the second one is a pool. And the pool had a huge sign out there, Jews not allowed in here. And so it became more and more restrictive. But the propaganda went much further. They could do anything they wanted to with us. What they really had to do was convince the German people. And how they did this, the effort they put into convince the German people that they were better off than they used to be, was an exemplary way to do this. In the old days, anti-Semitism was based on religion. And the difference between that and the Nazi anti-Semitism was that the Nazi anti-Semitism was based on blood. Religion you can change. You can go and get convert. But your blood you can never change. Your blood was soiled, your blood was bad, and that is what the propaganda told the Germans all along. I can give you examples of this propaganda effect from a very personal experience I had. When I was 6 months old, my mother hired a nanny, a young Christian girl from Bavaria who moved in with us in 1922 and practically raised me. without boring you, I'm from a very dysfunctional family. We're not going to get into this. Just take my word for it. It was. And so that girl, her name was Betty, Betty practically raised me. She was with me all through everything. And then there are a couple of things which you might want to know. One day, the Germans, well, let me go back and say, the Germans, among the anti-Semitism action, had created a newspaper. That was the most vilest newspaper you can think of. It was dedicated to anti-Semitism. It was so advertised that they even published that thing and you didn't just have to buy this, you could read it on the street. They had stands up there where the newspaper, page by page, was posted, and anybody could buy there. Anyway, the guy's name was a guy from Bavaria whose name was Julius Streicher. You don't have to remember that, but he wrote an article one time, and I don't even remember exactly the year it was. I just remember the incident. You know, as you know, the Jews eat special bread at Easter, at the Jewish Easter Passover. They have special unleavened bread known as matzahs, and you can buy this in any grocery stores, and that's a traditional thing what Jews eat. That guy published in his newspaper a big article with a headline which says, in essence, that in order for the Jews to bake that special bread at Passover, they must kill a Christian boy and use his blood to bake the bread. Now just think about this for a minute. This is, of course, to any one of you and to many of the German people, utter nonsense. I mean, this is just plain, excuse my language, stupid. But yet, it was hammered home. It was hammered home. And pretty soon, things began to drip down. Remember the old saying, when there's smoke, there must be fire? My Betty, who raised me, came one day to me and says, Robert, in those days there was no Bob, there was, Robert, did you hear about this or did you read this article? Which of course was picked up by the other press. And I said, no, I haven't. And then she told me what it was all about. And I said, Betty, why do you read crap like this? This is just stupid. She said, well, I don't know. Do you think they would publish this if it wouldn't be true? Well, I was shocked. Here's a person who knew me. And she added saying, of course, I don't believe in it, you know, but it was there. The question was asked. So in order to demonstrate to you that propaganda is a very vicious thing, but it can be utterly effective when you have a goal, no matter how bad the goal is. The idea of being contaminated, the relationship between Jews and Christians became an edict in September of 1935. During their party rally in Nuremberg, the Nazis did something which my parents were bitterly disappointed. They took away our citizenship. They told us that we were no longer German citizens. We were residents. We weren't kicked out. We were residents. We could stay where we are, but we had lost all the rights to participate in the cultural and political life of Germany. We had lost our citizenship. My father wasn't even allowed to treat Christian patients. Let me share an example with you. We had to turn on our radios. My father was the most unhappy of them We were not allowed to use public transportation. We were not allowed to have newspapers. It went on and on, from little piddling things to very major things. Did you realize that we had to take a name? When they took our citizenship away, they also declared that every male Jew must carry the name of Israel, and every Jewish lady or girl must carry the name of Sarah. Now, before you all think about, so what? We have lots of Sarahs and lots of Israels in America. That wasn't America. Those were typically Jewish names which had a stigma attached to them. I didn't want to be called Robert Israel Behr because that identified me immediately as a Jew. But the German people didn't mind. After the war, they will tell you that they hated the idea. But while it was going, it was accepted, and if the Jews were eliminated from political and social life, that was fine with them. No movies for us, no theater for us, no formal entertainment. So what was left were house parties. Now, politeness prohibits me to give you details about the house party. But we were young. We were 15, 16 years old. We wanted to live. We had nothing to live. When you feel miserable, you go outside, you play baseball, you go swimming, you have entertainment, you go have an ice cream cone. None of this was possible for us. So what we had to do in the privacy of a home. It's really sad, except at the time we didn't feel that so much, because we had, the girls were over and the boys came over, and then we had 4 bedrooms, and there was then we sat there and had discussions, and but I guess you get the picture. So that was our social life. And I must say, even though you laugh and I make it sound funny, it was really sad. Because, it was all forced. It wasn't naturally. We had to get together because there was nothing else for us to do. The life has shut us out. And while it sounds very funny because I make it funny, it really was very sad. And we still lived under the shadow of the Nazi regime, which was all pervasive. Now, when you live under those circumstances, what keeps you going? What keeps you going? One word, if you permit me. And that word is spelled H-O-P-E. Hope that things will change. Hope that things will get better. Hope that something will occur which makes everything like a bad dream and it's gone. Once you begin to lose that hope, once you begin to feel this is hopeless, we are stuck with it. And 12 years is a long time. Day after day after day. You begin to wonder what is in store for us. Will there ever be a change? Will there ever be something which takes this away from us like a bad dream, and you wake up and you're back in the normal world? You lose that, and that's very dangerous. That's very dangerous. There are incidents where propaganda plays a big part. Kristallnacht was pure, utter propaganda. It's an excuse to demonstrate the power of the regime by A, burning the synagogues, looting the stores, and arresting 30,000 Jews. My biological father was one of them. You, and you, off to jail. of the concentration camp. Did you do anything wrong? Sure you did. You were born as a Jew. You should have made arrangements not to be born as a Jew. No excuse. But you know, I want to talk about propaganda. This was explained to the Germans in the most radical terms. That was made as a wonderful thing, as something where the Nazi party saw that justice is created. And by justice, I mean a financial loss, 30,000 people in concentration camp. If the Jews don't know how to behave, if the Jews don't know how to get along with the Germans, then they deserve to be punished. Now, did the Germans buy that? You're going to get mixed emotions. After the war, when I was in the military, in the US Army, interrogating Germans to determine who was the Nazis, you know what? Couldn't find any. Me, a Nazi? Not me. Oh, him. Yeah, not me. There weren't any Nazis. They were all innocent creatures who had nothing to do with National Socialism. That is, forgive the language, that's BS. Because when you look at the old newsreels, they couldn't get their hands high enough. They were jubilant when something happened. And but the influence of the propaganda at the time is something we could learn a lot. I was about 15 or 16 years old. And I was standing one day on a sidewalk to cross the street. In the middle of the street was a cop who held the pedestrians back, wanted us to wait to cross the street, and you heard in the distance some music. And it wasn't very long we knew why the cop didn't want us to cross the street, because you saw a bunch, a kids, group of Hitler Youths marching by. They had their brown uniform on, they had their nifty brown belt on, they had a little dagger on the side, which later on I found out had inscribed the word blood and honor, that for 14-year-old kids, and they were had some pipe and drum corps and 2 flags. And they were marching down the street. They looked neat, they looked sharp, they looked together, and I stood there, a Jewish kid, and wished with all my heart that I could march with them. I'm not proud of the story, but at the time when I saw them, I wanted to be part of it. I wanted the uniform. I wanted to have the power and the ability to belong to the people whose kids were marching by me. That is what I always called very powerful propaganda, and very dangerous, very dangerous.